All right, welcome to Money and Relationships. This webinar is part of the Get Savvy, Grow Your Green Stuff webinar series. We've been doing this webinar series for many years now, and every year we like to do a few new topics. So this Money and Relationships webinar is a brand new topic, and my colleagues worked very hard on the content. So I'm going to hand it over to them to talk a little bit about who they are.
Hi everyone, my name is Kamaya Walls-Bichard. I am a consumer economics educator with University of Illinois Extension. I am currently in Bloomington, Illinois, where the temperature is a lovely 31 degrees.
Ooh, that sounds lovely. My name is Evelyn Peterson. I'm the Career Programs Manager in the Career Development and Internships Office at North Park University. So I am logged in from the lovely city of Chicago today.
Thank you, Kamaya and Evelyn. My name is Andrew Pellegrini. I'm primarily going to be hanging out in the chat, but I helped work on the slides for today's webinar. I partner with institutions across the state. We put together these webinars with lots of leaders in the state in financial education. So that's why you're seeing Extension and North Park University. Sometimes we have Columbia College on as a co-facilitator. I'm from University of Illinois System. So today I'm in Urbana, but sometimes I'm in Chicago and Springfield. So this is really a group effort to put together the content for these webinars. This particular webinar occurs during America Saves Week. So this week, the America Saves National Program is coordinating this effort to help Americans get connected with resources to help them accomplish their financial goals. We have our own local campaign, University of Illinois Saves, for the University of Illinois at Urbana, Chicago, and Springfield. So we're going to put in the chat, my friend Kendra is going to put in the chat, where you can log in and set a savings goal there. Champaign County Saves, if you're part of Champaign County but not part of the University of Illinois system or one of the universities, you can set a savings goal on champaigncountysaves.org. And if you're from the broader area of the United States, you can set a savings goal at americasaves.org. We're going to be talking a lot about setting shared goals and a partnership, with relationships. So I think that's an important place you can go to actually write down your goals so you're more likely to achieve them, and you can get connected with other resources to help you accomplish those goals together with your partner. Because we have been talking a lot about where we are, we want to know where you are, and then I'm going to hand it back over to Evie to talk a little bit more about what we're discussing today. So put in the chat where you are logging in from today. Some Indiana, lots
Minnesota.
of yeah, Texas. Well,
Wow.
I'm going to hand it over to you, Abby.
Okay, awesome. And actually, I think, Kamaya, you're going to review our learning objectives. Is that right?
Absolutely. So I can go ahead and get started. So for over the next hour or a little bit less than an hour, our goals are to define certain concepts relating to like our money beliefs and our money belief systems and how that develops. So looking at like our money scripts and financial socialization processes that influence like our behaviors. We're also going to look at how like these things that we might learn, how they influence, how they impact like our money management styles. And then we're going to look at some ways that we can have healthy conversation with our significant others and with others in our lives. And then a big important piece of it, of course, is, money and relationship is such a big topic. How do you protect yourself when you're in certain relationships? So we're going to be touching on that a little bit. And then at the end, we are going to talk about just some ways that we can, set and accomplish like shared goals. All right, so to kick things off, we have a question that we would love for you to put like answers to in our little chat right there. So this question, are you seeing anyone right now? And when Andrew and I were talking about this question, I just remember like my grandma, like when I was in my early 20s, she'll be like, so Kamaya, are you seeing anyone right now? So think try to picture your grandma or somebody in your life asking you this question. And go ahead and put that in the chat box. And I think our next slide has like some of the options that you can put in. Ooh, I see one that says engage. Congratulations. So an important part, I'm gonna let you put like those in the chat. And an important part in asking this question is to kind of gauge who we are talking to today. Oh, wow, a lot of married, wonderful. To gauge who we're talking to today, because some of this conversation and some of the topics that we're going to be covering relating to like the money and love piece, it might look different if you're single versus if you're married. So we just want to gauge that a little bit. And moving on, let's talk about how we learn about money. And so to begin like this presentation on this fact is just talking about like what are some ways that we learn about money. And I know as children we learn directly and indirectly from those around us, so including our families, our friends, so and our peers at school, or schools, maybe like our religious institutions, different places that influence how we think about money and what money means to us. So I want to start out with a definition, and you're going to see a lot of these because we love to define terms. We don't come into it assuming that everybody knows what we're talking about. So with the financial socialization piece, this is just one way that researchers have always been interested in trying to find out how people come to understand like their money behaviors and how they think about money. And so for researchers in personal finance professionals like all of us who are organizing this presentation, we've been interested in understanding that, understanding where it comes from. And so a big part of this in thinking about like financial socialization and to define the term, it's a process by which young people acquire standards, values, norms, skills, knowledge, and attitude. And a lot of this in how this is developed, this later on affects how you think about money on later on in life. So we want to start out with a bang like that, just talking about like what financial socialization is and how does that influence all of your values and your beliefs about money. So we have another question here. What are the phrases, experience, or items that shape your money story? And with that, think about that question and I'll turn that over to Evie. And if you can see also too in like our chat, we are sharing resources on the terms and the different things that we cover in the presentation. I'll hand it over to you, Evie.
Awesome, thanks. So in order to engage in conversations with another person, it's a lot of times really important to understand what your own money story is. And the truth is that there are a lot of phrases or experiences or maybe things that have shaped your money story. And so if there's something that you remember, maybe a grandparent saying at some point, or a parent or a mentor, what's some of those money phrases that you've heard in the past? Like money doesn't grow on trees, or don't buy one thing if you can't buy it twice. So if you have any of those ideas, then if you can put them in the chat box, it's important to think about those pieces. Let's see, a few ideas. Go shopping when you're feeling down. Always have your own money saved for a rainy day. That's a popular one that I've heard a lot. The borrower is slave to the lender. Awesome. Good, these are great. Yeah, YOLO, a nest egg. Great, so these are all shaping our stories. And so it's important for us to understand how those pieces then carry over into our financial situation a little bit, and to even share those with someone that we might be dating or married to or engaged, so that we understand some of the similarities and some of the differences as well. I'm going to transition next into a little bit about your values. So we can talk about our story and what's shaped us over the period of our life, but it's also important to think about our own values and how that shapes it. So one example of a quiz to take to assist in identifying your values when it comes to money is the Life Values Quiz on smartaboutmoney.org. It's important to understand about these values and to keep in mind that these can change throughout our life too. So there might be different phases or times in our life when we're driven more by a social value, and then it can change to more of a financial value. And this is another situation where it can be unique to each individual and important for people to know that about each other. You're going to see in the chat box, there's also a link to the financial identity quiz. I'm not going to go into details about that one, but both of those are great tools to use. So I am going to go a little bit more in depth about social values and each of these different ones so that you can hopefully get a better perspective of what this means. But social values are really around your family and your friends and your community. So the focus is sensing a belonging with others and can be found in numerous ways, but some of those could be through volunteering, sharing with a partner. I know that a lot of the students that I work with, there's a very important social justice piece for them, and it can even be political parties. These are just a few examples. Obviously, there are larger ones as well. In terms of inner values, this would focus more on the psychological and spiritual aspect. So this can include seeing ourselves and how we believe others see us. Sometimes there's something around desiring to worship or not to worship, safety and security, and then a lot will be tied to purpose and meaning in life. The third one is physical values. And so this is actually around health and environment. So there's the material world aspect, your physical health, your well-being. I give an example to a lot of students that I talk to in that for me, I grew up as an athlete through college. And so I still value that physical piece a lot. And so I invest some of my money towards fitness classes or registering for half marathons or other races. There's also a physical comfort to this. And so an example is there are some people that would spend more money on a one-bedroom apartment or a space to themselves versus wanting to have to navigate roommates or something like that. So that's some ideas around physical values. And then the fourth one is financial values. And this really focuses on sufficiency, sustainability, appropriateness, and it talks about accuracy, organization, discipline. What do you think or believe about money? High financial value is possible without a lot of money. I know our students have a hard time understanding that because it's, I don't have any money. And so actually I see a lot of students that identify with this value as a lot of their decisions are based on the money that they do or don't have. So that's one way that financial values could play out as well. So with this, another way to look at these values is to just focus on what question do you tend to ask when you are thinking about money. And so someone that might be more prone to an inner value would say, which option will make me feel more secure or in control? Someone that's driven more by a physical value would ask, which option will help me enjoy my surroundings more? A social question would be, which option will connect me with others? And a financial one would focus more on which option will be best given my resources. So these are all things to help you in the conversation. I would encourage you to check out that quiz on Smart About Money, and it actually provides some questions to help if you choose to have that conversation with a significant other as well. I'm going to hand it off to Kamaya next.
All right, thank you so much, Evie. And our third thing that we're going to look at in terms of understanding who you are with money, the third aspect that we'll look at is your money scripts. And in honoring like this theme, thinking about like how our money beliefs develop and evolve over time, I wanted to talk a little bit about like researchers who, you know, theorize a little bit about financial behaviors and come up with like these really interesting categories of behaviors that they believe that a lot of us may fall in or not fall into. So like these different categories. So in understanding yourself first, there are a couple questions that I definitely want us to explore before we even go into like the definition of money scripts. And for like these questions, you know, understanding how like your money scripts might sorry, it might be related to like your financial behavior, thinking about how you make money decisions and how you learn about money, putting all of that together and what that's going to mean for us as an individual in a relationship and in a partnership with another person. So diving into money scripts, the definition is typically unconscious, transgenerational beliefs about money that are typically developed like during childhood, and it helps to drive like our financial behavior. So the financial socialization piece that we talked about in the beginning, that gives kind of like a theoretical foundation for our understanding of how our money habits develop. And then the money scripts sort of breaks it down into like different categories to best address what are some of the things that we do and how we see money and how that might influence like our later behaviors, whether you see that in a good or positive light. So I want to go over like 4 of the main categories that are presented under money scripts, and we'll go over these like individually. So we have like the money avoidance, we have money worship, money status, and money vigilance. And for each of these, they have a little bit of different meaning to some of them. So I want to start off with like the money status one. And for people who might fall under this category, the money status is the belief that your net worth equals like your self-worth. So the amount of money I have in the bank, that kind of pushed me up a little bit in society and how I see myself. And that gives me like some kind of like status in society. And for people who may not have like the status that I have, is maybe because they don't deserve it. They didn't work as hard as I did to get like this money. And so there is a lot of underlying meaning with this one, and it couldn't go back to what you think of as keeping up with the Joneses. I'm sure some of you have heard that term before, where, you know, I need to show myself a certain way because my net worth is equal to my self-worth. And the other one that I want to touch on, and I don't want to spend too much time on these because I know we have a number of things to cover with these, is the money avoidance. So this could be because like people who might fall into this category could be because, you know, money stirs up like fear and anxiety, and that could be for a number of reasons. Say for example, you know, maybe in your past money was used as a form of control. And for money avoiders, they tend to worry a lot about different aspects of money and might be willing to even give away money so that they get some control over it. So there are just like differences there as well too. And for the money avoiders, may think that for people who have a lot of money, they have that money because they're greedy, or they did certain things to have that money. So there's like this disconnect to a certain degree. And going over like all of these different types of money scripts, if you can notice like certain themes that are coming out, like there's certain things in how people might think about this money that might affect how they balance their lives and how they carry on in like relationships. So the third one I want to talk about is money worshiper. And this is just a sense that money makes everything better. Like the more money you have, the better things will be. And more money equals happiness. But an important thing to note about this piece too, with the idea that money might equal to happiness, research shows that for even like lottery winners, when they win that money, they feel great. Yes, it's great. I got this money. I won this money. But when it comes towards like measuring like happiness, like they're not significantly happier than people who did not win the lottery. So that idea that money equals happiness is a tough one. And for people who might fall under like this category of money worshiper, it could lead to like what we call disordered behaviors. And like money disordered behaviors are just behaviors that can become problematic later on. So say for example, wanting to make more money may get involved in like gambling, which might affect their individual and their interpersonal life that they have with their partner. Okay, the last one I want to mention here is the money vigilance. And with like this category, there might be like a sense of shame and secrecy when it comes to money. And some of it too goes back to when I think about even like our culture, and for a lot of people not talking about money, it is a very difficult conversation to have, and it might not be one of those things that you talk about around the dinner table. So that is one way that the money vigilance might think about money, where it's a very sensitive topic. And say, for example, they're in a family where they might be making more or less than other family member, the income guilt might fall in, and they might hide certain details and certain things about money. When it comes to relationship, if that's kind of like the trajectory of like how behaviors are evolving, that might be problematic in some relationships, where that person who is money vigilant might hide certain things from their partner. So with like these 4 different categories, like why does it matter? Why do we address like these categories? And I think an important part of it is just to understand that some of them might evolve in like unhealthy patterns that can negatively affect relationships. All right, so the chat is there. So if you have any questions, we just spend a lot of time talking about who you are with money, understanding who you are by going over the piece with like the socialization piece, the values piece, and trying to understand like the money script piece. That's a lot of information, a lot of time we spend on that, because we think that's an important part of being in a partnership with someone or in different relationships, understanding who you are so that you can better communicate with those people in your life. So I'm going to move on to this next piece. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. All right, so thinking about communication. Why does it matter? Why does it matter to have these healthy, effective communication in like relationships? And it's with like any other type of relationships that you have, whether it's employer-employee relationships and intimate relationships or romantic relationships. Communication is an important tool and an important piece of that. So it is important to focus on this piece, because effective communication matters, especially when it comes to money. And even going back to like some of the money scripts and the different personalities around money, it is highly likely that you and your partner have different personalities. And so learning how to break down some of the barriers relating to how you communicate is a very important piece. And money is a very important factor in relationship. And we understand that economic pressures can negatively affect relationships. So thinking about why we have certain conversations and how we have certain conversations. And so I'm going to jump right into another term that is one of my favorites, and it's called harsh startup. Are any of you kind of like sarcastic when you enter a conversation? You come into it a certain way and your partner already knows. They already know immediately as you're entering this conversation. It's like, oh boy. So for a lot of us with like harsh startup, it's when you're entering into like the initial phase of a conversation, making sure that you are not starting with sarcasm or criticism. So say, for example, you're dating a lovely person who you'll enjoy spending time with, but the last time you went out on a date, they didn't pay. And so you're getting ready, you're planning like your next date, and you start the conversation and you say, well, you need to pay for this date because you didn't pay last time. Well, is there a better way to say that? Absolutely. So the harsh startup piece is learning ways to communicate that it doesn't start with like sarcasm or criticism, and the person feels okay like continuing that conversation with you. Because if it starts out like that harsh way, then they might back down a little bit. Okay? All right, so the next piece that I want to talk about have to do with like, what are some tips then? So we're talking about like this whole communications piece. Why does it matter to focus on certain things in a relationship within that conversation about money and not on everything? Because you could focus broadly on a lot of different things. So here are some tips that we have for talking about money while you're in a relationship. And the first one is to avoid that harsh startup. I know you are very funny, you're sarcastic. I have a partner who is very sarcastic, so we have to work on that. So many of you are maybe like that. So making sure that you're starting out in a way where it does not seem like there's like a criticism there. Another piece is, do not start that conversation if you're hangry. And I love this term. We make up terms. We just make up terms and put them in the Urban Dictionary whenever we want, right? So this piece is just when you are hungry and angry at the same time. Like, that's not a good way to start with that. And I see that Andrea has like a wonderful example right there in the corner. And another tip too is to use I statements. So instead of focusing on, oh, you didn't pay the bills last time, use more I statements where you're focusing on you and making sure that you are not starting off with like that criticism piece. And also to staying focused on what you are talking about and not bringing in other things in that relationship. So say, for example, you're in a long-term committed relationship with your partner, you're married, and you were talking about the utility bills. But somehow you started talking about some other bills that you need to pay, mortgage, rent, all the other things that you might have like joint responsibilities for. So trying to stay focused on what's current and what's in front of you is a good way to start conversations that can have good outcomes for you. Another thing that I really like about this piece with the different tips on here too is start with like a shared goals. So what are some things that you love and want to do together? Say, for example, you want to go on a vacation. I was teaching a class last night and these ladies were talking about going on a cruise. And so we were talking about shared goals around things that are fun and things that you want to do. So what are some shared things that you really want to do? And you can set that as a goal, and then you can have different smaller conversations about the different financial responsibilities that you have in your life. All right, so I'm going to pass it on back to Evie, and she's going to be talking about considering like some future goals.
Thanks, Kamaya. That's actually a great transition, talking about shared goals, because one of the most important things is to consider your future. And a lot of conversations around finances will start with what your goals are. And so when it comes to deciding those things with another person, I always think it's a wise idea to determine what your time frame is when considering relationships in the future. So what do you and your partner anticipate for the next 2 years or the next 6 months or the next 4 years? What's kind of your time that you want to anticipate in terms of what's coming up? And we'll dive a little bit deeper into it, but those images on the screen are a good little idea of what we're going to talk about in the upcoming slides. So let's talk a little bit about setting expectations and what that means. So when it comes to setting expectations, it's important to think about what your expectations are for handling finances and what are your ground rules. So when it comes to dating, we've already talked about it a little bit, but that big question of who pays. Is it always 50-50? Does it depend on who plans the date? What are your rules around that? When it comes to cohabitating, how are you going to split the bills? That's a big question for a lot of people. Then as you continue to be together, and if you are talking about getting engaged, are you going to have a ring? No rings? How do you feel about the wedding? What are the plans for the wedding? And a lot of times at that point, you'll also start to be talking about kids and if that's in the future. Whether it's 2 years out or 4 years out, whatever it might be. And then married, there's a ton of different questions, but a couple of those could be, who is working? Are you both working? If you are thinking about having kids, will you both continue to work? Do you combine the income? What parts of your income are you sharing? There's a lot of different pieces that are really important to be upfront and talk through. Obviously, all of this depends on the stage of the relationship, and I would say the most important thing is to set clear and consistent expectations. Obviously, you'll want to leave some room for change as the relationship grows, and being intentional about checking in with each other about those goals and what your expectations are. But overall, when it comes to money and relationships, our expectations of how financial responsibilities should be divided are not only by financial socialization processes, but by our worldviews and understanding of relationship dynamics as well. So it's important to think about the different stages that you might be in. And so what does it look like, whether you're single and happy or single and looking, or just the only one in charge of your finances? I know this can also be true for widows as well. So some priorities to think about in terms of if you are single, we'll move to the next slide, is to think about, okay, you're the sole provider or sole source of your financial support. And so what are your financial priorities at that point? Obviously, you would hopefully be able to establish some kind of budget or money management habits so you know or have a general understanding of where your money is going and how much you're bringing in as well in terms of income. Another really important piece is to start an emergency fund if you haven't already, because that's a perfect way to prepare for anything that's unexpected, whether it's for yourself or if you start to date someone or are in a relationship. And then saving for retirement if possible. Every little bit counts, and so the more that you can work towards that now, the more that that can pay off in the future as well. So that's a way to start as a single person, but what about when you start to date? How do you save money while dating? We do believe that it is possible, and so I'm sure that all of you have input on this. So to start, I would love to think about or hear from each of you. Share in the chat box, what are some ways that you save money on dates? Any ideas out there? I know there's a ton of different things to do. Lunches, no alcohol, free events in the community. These are great. Groupon is a huge one. Just dessert instead of going out for dinner. Perfect. You guys have a lot of ideas. Some of the same ones that we've come up with. So these are some of the ideas that we've come up with. So on our next slide, you can seek out free entertainment. And a lot of you mentioned that in terms of movies in the park or on the quad, spending time outdoors. Someone mentioned a bookstore, I know, or going for a picnic. But also look for low-cost options. So some of you even mentioned not going out for dinner and just doing dessert. Or maybe it's just a lunch. I know that there are some opportunities where you can mystery shop at a restaurant together where they're actually paying you to evaluate the products at a restaurant. And I would say another option is a date jar. So keep low-cost date ideas, and then you have a jar that's gradually filling up with change. And I'm always surprised when I do a jar and fill it up with my loose change, how much money I end up having. So those are a few ideas. Some ideas other than a common one that we hear a lot, Netflix and chill. There's a ton of different ways that you can be creative. So if you're currently a student, you can study together. I like the idea of Spotify and dance party in addition to Netflix and chill. Being outside and going for a walk. A lot of you mentioned cooking dinner and having that time in the kitchen together, or playing video games. There's all kinds of options out there that we should consider. And I'm gonna hand it off to Kamaya, and she's gonna talk a little bit about the importance of protecting yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Evie. So far, let's get caught up here. So far, we've talked about understanding yourself, communicating better, and considering like your future goals. So now we're going to go a little bit into protecting yourself. And while we do support the idea of open, balanced relationship, it is imperative that you think about what are some of the ways that others might look to exploit like your wonderfulness, right? So we didn't make this up. Relationship scam exists. It really does. And with a new report from the FTC, they found that the average reported loss due to romance scam in 2018 was $2,600. And this amount has grown over the years. And it's unfortunate that people who are 70 and over reported like bigger losses than this in the amount of like $10,000. This is a thing that absolutely exists. And when we talk about like romance scams or relationship scams, it exists online and in person. And so with this, what are some of the red flags to look at when you're thinking about whether it's the beginning of a new relationship or a relationship that you've already established? What are some of the warning signs that you should look at in relationships? So a big thing, say for example, like somebody requesting like money through wire transfer. You meet this wonderful person, you connected online, you've been corresponding for a while. They're trying to work out a time for you all to see each other, and boom, I really want to come see you, but I don't have the full amount of money to pay for the airline ticket because I'm all the way in DC and I just need a little bit of help. So different things like that. That's just one example of how that can exist in like the online atmosphere. And then there are others where it's asking for like your PIN or asking you to sign contracts. Do not sign anything that you haven't read or fully understand. Take a step back, because you could be in a relationship with a person who wants you to sign to be joined on something with them, and if it's something that you don't understand, you can say, oh, let me just take it and read it over and take a step back and talk to somebody, talk to a third person who doesn't have like any kind of attachment to that piece of thing, and talk with them about that. So making sure that you are paying attention to like these little details, these little red flags that might pop up within like a relationship. So yeah, focus on those warning signs. Now moving on to, say for example, you are in a cohabitating relationship with another person. And this is where you might have joint responsibilities. For example, you might have like a lease in both of your names. You have legally binding documents, making sure that when you enter into like these different agreements, you are focusing on the fact that yes, we're both responsible for this, responsible for what is happening, and we can set goals that we want to achieve together and focus a lot on these different ones. So for the cohabitating relationship, it might look very different than if you're dating, because then you have like different contracts and different things that you have responsibilities for. I can't say responsible for some reason. So thinking about how you divide up tasks and what that means, and going into that, thinking about whether or not you want to enter that phase where you are planning things together, you are organizing like your financial lives together. So the financial planning piece, and of course with financial planning, it's just a strategic approach to like outline all aspects of your financial life, understanding where you are, where you want to be, and how you can get there. And so for like a lot of the different ones that in the next slide that has like the different pieces of like the financial planning, I do believe that there is a presentation that's, I think it's the one planning for the unexpected or the unforeseen, where they go into a lot of details with this information. And yeah, I'm not sure, Andrea, if you have like that link to that, but yes, there is. There is a link on there. We have in there to plan in for some of the unexpected pieces, and the financial planning piece is an important part of that. All right, so in protecting yourself, good rule of thumb is to keep like your information secure. Keep your passwords and your personal identification information secure. So whether it's like passwords or prenuptial agreements, thinking about ways that you can guard against financial exploitation. And especially with like these legal documents, it's important to think about that. And we have kind of like a brief definition of prenups, because for a lot of people, it's one of those things we see in kind of like the soap operas where they're talking about, oh yes, you need to sign this prenuptial agreement before we can get married. But it's not as elusive as that. It exists in real life. And this is just an agreement that couples make before they get married. And, you know, it's just a way to consider what you own going into like the marriage, and what, in case the worst happens, what you come out of that relationship with. And this is important too, just as a side note, it's important too for a lot of people who are getting married later on in life, who may have already established themselves financially, and thinking about like what their assets are and what is joint and what they would like to keep separate. So it's just conversations to have and different things to think about before you are kind of like at the end and you're like, oh, what did we do? So big thing with this piece of it with is protecting yourself, whether it's from your passwords, keeping those secure, to like doing like legal documents where you and your partner have agreement on different things. All right, so in additional to talking about passwords, prenuptial agreements, a big one that we think is important is thinking about loans. And for a lot of people, it's just something that, oh yeah, I have a friend or I have a family member who needs my help and I'm just willing to do that. But signing on a loan or co-signing on a loan, it's a big deal, because when you do, you are taking on the full responsibility of the repayment of that loan. So if you, for example, sign on a car loan and the person who you signed with defaults on that loan, you are responsible for those payments. And this as well will affect like your ability to borrow in the future. So a lot of things to think about with like the co-sign-in piece, because you are saying, yes, I am going into this agreement with this person. Yes, they're the primary person on here, but in case something happens, you would be responsible for that. So we think that it's important that you know that when you are doing that, it is okay to say no. It is okay to do that. And it depends on like the situation, and it depends on like the person you're going into like the agreement with, because it could be somebody who you've known for a very long time and you think of them as the best person in the world, but kind of look and evaluate, look at their situation. Are they working? When can they pay this off? What's their timeline? Do they have like goals regarding what they're going to be, how they're going to pay off this loan, to say? So just thinking about like these different factors before you enter into these types of agreements. All right. So we have a couple questions on here. So with like co-signing on loans, it definitely influence like your credit history. So a couple questions. How does your joint financial responsibilities affect your credit history? And you can go ahead and put some answers in the chat. So tell me, give us some ideas of how you think, for example, if you co-sign on a loan, how does that influence like your credit history or affect your credit history? Any takers? All right, so the option is still there for you to include some information. And another piece with this is talking about like going back to the fact that how this affects like your overall debt is if, for example, you co-sign on a loan, that becomes a part of your credit history. And I'll give you a personal example. When I was in college and when my aunt, she co-signed on a student loan for me. And so a couple years later, when she was ready to like buy a new house, her lenders really wanted to know if this loan is being paid off. And so what we had to do, I had to work with my bank to get a list of all my payment history to say that I'm currently paying it off, so that she could take it to her lender to show that to them, because it was on her credit report and they saw it there, and they just need to know that it is we're keeping up with the loan. And even though the payment history showed all of that, they still wanted more certified information. So it affects you in a lot of different ways if you want to borrow after you have co-signed on that loan. So thinking about like how that affects like your credit history is important. And if you already co-signed on the loan, you can access like your credit report at annualcreditreport.com. And so each person is eligible to receive like free credit reports from all three bureaus once a year, and you can access that information. So if you have like any questions or ideas regarding that, you can absolutely let us know, and you can go online to annualcreditreport.com to find out more information on like your credit report. It also too with like this piece, like with the debt piece, how does it affect you? Like when you were joined on different loans or different agreements with other people, how it might affect how you repay like your student loans and how you file your taxes. We have more information on that. And with that, I'm going to pause for a second and see if there are any questions relating to this piece of it, with the protection piece relating to how do you protect yourself when you're in a relationship. All right, so we'll have the chat open and you can put your question in as we go. And there's one more aspect that I want to touch on before I turn over to Evie. And this piece focuses on how we handle financial uncertainty. So financial problems are inevitable in a relationship. And how do we navigate like these financial uncertainties? What does this mean for us, and how do we overcome like some of the issues that we might have? How do we learn to communicate? Yes, we can understand her values, we can understand where we developed her, how we develop our money scripts and how that affects like her money habits. But within like a relationship, how do you apply like what you know to making sure that you are working like with your partner to address some of the problems that you have, and not let that be the main thing that affects your relationship? So the uncertainty piece comes into play when we think about like financial satisfaction and satisfaction with like a relationship and with your partner. Research shows that couples tend to argue more about how money is managed than the actual amount of money. And so this just got me thinking and thinking about like our money personalities and who we are and how we handle money. And in a relationship where you might have two different people who think maybe think differently about money, there is where like conflict can arise. So one of the questions that we have for you is, how do you address financial uncertainties or emergencies? How do you address that in like your relationships, whether past or present? Throw us some answers. All right, so moving on, with thinking about like the financial uncertainty piece, like I said, money issues are inevitable in a lot of relationships and in a lot of circumstances. So how can you reduce the uncertainties that are or might exist within like your relationships? And we got like some answers in here too to that question. Planning for emergencies, having like your emergency fund. So some ways that people can reduce uncertainties, looking at like the information that's available to you, like current information, trying to understand what your financial situation is and trying to do that together. I know it is hard for a lot of people, but learning what the information is. Say for example, you know you have like a debt that you have to pay off. Talking with your partner about that debt and coming up with a plan on how you are going to tackle that is another important piece. And that leads into like this proactively seeking like information to know that, can I pay this off within a certain amount of time? So figuring out what resources are available to you and using those resources to get all of that to a place where you have peace in your relationship. So absolutely. And the last piece that I want to quickly touch on in terms of like understanding and navigating financial uncertainties is thinking about like what are some things that you can do to make sure that you reduce that. So first one is being aware of your emotions. Like going into like a situation where you know that you are not going in ready to fight. You are not going in with the criticism. You're going in with the anticipation and the hope that you really want to address like this issue that you're having. So start out with like being aware of your emotions, um, working on like that positive communication piece, like using that I statement instead of directly saying, you didn't pay this bill, you were supposed to do this, why didn't you do this? So making sure that we're working on that positive communication piece. The other piece, of course, is discussion, like discussing your shared goals and values. What are some things that are important to both of you and that you really want to do together? Understanding like cultural values as well. So say, for example, your partner's from a different culture than you, and they might think of money maybe in more of a communal family sense, where they help out different family members at different time if they're going through certain hardships, or just to help like their nieces and their nephews. And that might be one way where their cultural values influence how they think about money. So understanding that is important. We also talk about like being transparent, so like that financial transparency. And our colleague Sasha did a fantastic job the other day with podcast, and I believe she had a blog post on financial transparency. So this piece, of course, is very important in being open and honest about like the money you have coming in and what you have going out and how that might influence like your joint responsibilities. And the last piece that I would like to touch on is everybody comes into like the relationship with different strengths. So acknowledging each other's financial strengths and knowing that, yes, if you do well with like making sure that certain bills are paid on time, thank you for doing that. So showing appreciation to your partner about what they do and how they do, and being open and honest about how you manage like overall your finances and thinking about being transparent with your partner. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Evie.
Awesome. Thanks, Kamaya. So we're just going to kind of wrap up at this point and pull it all together. I know there's probably been a ton of information, and I know the chat box has been really busy as well. So we just want to end it with a couple of summarizing points to keep in mind. And obviously this resource is available later on too if you need to come back and check it out. But some quick tips and summary. Know yourself first. So we talked about your money story. We talked about your values, money scripts. Think through those different ideas and how does that play out for you, as well as anyone else that you are having those conversations with. Make sure that you communicate with that person, your wants, your needs, your goals, where are the similarities, where are the potential differences. Look for ways to save while dating. You all had a ton of great ideas in the chat box. We provided only a few, and I feel like you all doubled our ideas, so keep those in mind. Kamaya did a great job sharing about how to protect yourself. Remember, it's okay to say no. We would rather that you protect yourself and put yourself first in some of those situations that might just feel a little off in some way. Also, it's important to learn how to talk about money. And this plays out in several different ways, obviously with a partner, but in the future to think about, okay, how do I talk about money if I choose to have kids or with people that are younger, and what's my advice to them? So think through that. Understand your shared financial responsibilities and what that looks like so you're on the same page. And always make sure that you navigate financial uncertainties together. You are a team, and so to approach it that way and talk through what is uncertain currently and how can we get through this is a high value recommendation that we would have for you. So thanks so much for tuning in. I'm going to hand it off to Andrea, and she's going to share a little bit about our awesome financial literacy program.
Thank you, guys. I want a round of applause for Kamaya and Abby today. You guys did so great. This program is, or this webinar, is recorded and will be available in the Financial Literacy Badges Program course. We have 5 financial literacy digital badges that we hand out. If you complete 3 educational activities in a particular category, you will earn a digital badge that you can place on LinkedIn or share on Twitter or put on your online portfolio so you can share with others what you've learned about different financial education concepts. So this particular webinar will be part of the Saving Badge, and that's just simply because we talked about setting shared goals and shared financial responsibilities and a little bit on how to save your money together. So you can take that quiz and get credit towards this particular badge by going to the link, which Kendra's going to put in the chat here, go.uillinois.edu/relationships quiz. It is in Moodle, which is a learning management system, and you can log in either using your NetID if you're part of the University of Illinois system, or as a guest, and you put in SMMC as the login for that. So we also have another webinar scheduled for Wednesday, March 27th at noon. If you want to check that out, it's on Cover Your Assets, which is all about insurance, different types of insurance, why you need insurance, and different ways to protect yourself against risk. We'll stay on to answer any questions, but we're also going to put our contact information in the chat as well. I got a couple questions that I wanted to address in the private chat while everyone was talking about this great stuff. I think it's really important to stress that we talked about financial socialization, different ways to communicate about money when you're in a relationship, sharing money in different ways and what the considerations are for that, sharing financial responsibility. But you don't have to be in a romantic relationship for any of these things to apply to other types of relationships. Kamaya mentioned her aunt co-signing on a loan and how that impacted her financial life as well as her aunt's financial life. I have helped my parents with different types of financial transactions that impacts both their financial life and my financial life. And the responsibility is equally shared, but there might be nuances that we didn't go over today. It's just really hard to address all the different ways that we can talk about money, share about money, and there's not a prescription for, hey, if you are married, you need to do money management this way or that way. It's all kind of, there's so many good ways to do it, right? And you got to do what works for you and your partner or you and whoever you're sharing a financial responsibility with. So we have some questions. Do you have any recommendations for planning for bill splitting or trip planning, emergency planning? I think this is a great question. We probably should have answered this because there's so many different ways to answer it. And I'm going to let Kamaya go first with answering this.
Okay, so do you have any recommendations for planning for bill splitting, trips? Sorry, my mic was on mute. Okay, so going with this piece, yeah, there are a number of ways that you can sit down and talk with your partner. So the first thing is to try to figure out a time, a very convenient time that you both can sit down and talk about this. And make it clear, be open, because I have this in my own family as well too, where one person makes more than the other. So we go over like each bill and what these bills are. So for different ones with like paying things off, or planning trips, so like for vacation saving, planning for emergency. And we split it up based on the amount that each of us have coming in, where we know what are some of the bigger bills, what are some things that we need to take care of right now. So we make like these different goals of things that we need to take care of right now versus things that we can wait on maybe like for a few months or so on. So we just divided up a couple of different ways where we sit down, lay everything out on the table, this is what should be going here. How do we get there? And one way that we, of course, do this is making sure that I don't feel like I'm spending all my income is going towards like the house. Because it's a hard feeling to feel like you're everything that you have come in is just going out. So we just sit down and have a conversation together and work it out that way.
So Evie has to go to another class, so I will also provide my perspective. So I am in a family, my kind of background is I'm the breadwinner in my family. So the way that we've split up things is I have agreed to pay for everything related to housing, and my partner pays for everything related to like food. And then when we have shared goals, we'll both talk about what we can contribute with our different incomes. And I think as you grow your wealth and grow your finances, it's a little bit easier to have those conversations. I think it's much more stressful if you're living paycheck to paycheck, or if you don't have a solid understanding of what each person's resources are too. So even having a conversation about what are you able to commit to, is this in line with what your values are? That's a really important part of the conversation too. Our friend Kathy Sweedler also probably has some good things to address here. Kathy, do you want to unmute yourself and talk about what your perspective is?
I think, this is a great question, and one that a lot of people struggle with, both while they're dating and then after they're married. And having unequal incomes can often be a problem for people to kind of work through. I was kind of just backing up what you two were saying and saying, I think I've heard so many different ways that people do it, and some of them are very creative and elaborate, and some are sort of more simple. But I think the key is communication. Assuming gets me in trouble, so it's always better to have that to talk about it and plan for it. And maybe planning is more important to one person than the other. I've also have had to learn, being the one that it makes less money, to let somebody else treat me. That's fine. Like that's part of our relationship. It's hard for me. I have to bite my tongue sometimes on what gets spent, but everybody should have a say in how spending happens, especially when he's spending his money that he earned. So, I think talking about it can be hard, but it can be really helpful to keep things moving forward peacefully.
I agree. And I've lived with different people in relationships before I got married myself. So being an outside witness, I could see how people just made assumptions about who paid the bills, and they would overpay or they would forget to pay a bill. And I think communicating would have helped them with overcoming some of those obstacles earlier. Like obviously they figured out how to communicate and found a system that worked for them. And I can see that when we do financial coaching sessions with people in relationships as well, is that communication piece is the common denominator between all of them.
Yeah, and to add to that piece, with the communication aspect of it, creating like a spending plan where you both like list things out, because sometimes it feels like the money is going out, but what is it going to? Like just list things out, all the different things that you are covering. And for some people, some might like the apps that they use to create like a budget, create a spending plan, and some people prefer like spreadsheets. So figuring out like techniques that you both can kind of like agree on that might work for like your situation too, is just like having things out to say this is all of it, like that transparency piece and what's going where.
Yeah, and you can even just touch base maybe once a month. It doesn't have to be every single day. It depends on when you're bills are due, what systems you're using, and what kind of works with your communication style too. So are there any other questions that we missed? Feel free to log off. You don't have to stay on, but we will stay on to answer any other questions you might have. I think we might be done. Anything else to add? Thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. I know this is kind of like a hard topic for some people to talk about, so we are glad to put it out there.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording. If you do think of any questions later, you can always email studentmoney@uillinois.edu and we will make sure to get an answer to your question.